this video, I'm going to talk about shoulder separations. I'm going to talk about what is it, how to determine the severity of it, what you should do, where you should go, who you should see, and what to expect in the recovery process, and what to expect at getting back on the bike after suffering this injury. First, what is a shoulder separation? It is when the clavicle and the or collarbone and the acromion of the shoulder blade become separated, as in get injured. So this is called the AC joint for acromion and clavicular. And what happens is the ligaments over the joint end up getting injured or partially torn or completely torn. And then it looks separated because you'll get the collarbone will pop up and make a noticeable bump on your shoulder. The mechanism of this injury is from falling on the either outside the shoulder or on the tip, such as tipping over, going over the handlebars, or sliding out in a corner. It is also very similar mechanism to a collarbone fracture, which is why you see both of these injuries quite commonly in mountain bikers. One thing to distinguish for terminology I see is people talking about dislocated versus separated. So a dislocation is the ball and socket joint, what allows you to move your arm and shoulder in a great range of motion. And this is the head of the humerus that sits right here that pops out of the socket, which is also semi-common in mountain bike, but not quite as much as a shoulder separation. So when this happens, what should you do? First, you should go see a doctor. Great if you can see a sports medicine physician, but this is one injury that may be worth going to an emergency department to get x-rays quite soon, because there can be associated fractures with it, that being the collarbone, your shoulder blade, or other structures in the air that can be damaged. You want to make sure, rule out more severe injuries. When it comes to grading it as in how severe it is a 6-point scale, whereas 1 being where the ligaments just over the top of the joint, the AC joint between the collarbone and the scapula, are injured, and you generally don't see much of an extra bump in this case. When you get to grade 2, what you start having ligaments called the corticoclavicular ligaments get injured. So those ligaments get partially torn or stretched out. You start seeing a bigger bump on the top of your shoulder. When you go to grade 3, that means both the ligaments over the AC joint and these corticoclavicular ligaments that hold the collarbone down have been completely torn, and you see a much bigger step deformity on the top of your shoulder. Now, those 3 are the most common ones you'll see in a sport like mountain biking, as well as many others. So when you start getting into type 4, 5, and 6, you're starting to see more severe injuries and potential surgical implications, and make sure the injury heals correctly. So a type 4 is when the clavicle starts being pushed backwards. Type 5 is when there's a certain measurement and the collarbone is sitting really high above your acromion joint, and type 6 is when the collarbone is actually below the shoulder blade. This one is very rare, something I've never actually seen myself. And in my career working with injured athletes, I have almost predominantly into high 90 percentile seen grades 1s through 3, and these are very rarely dealt with surgery. So what to expect now that you've had an injury? As an athletic therapist, I always suggest you work with a professional that is experienced in sports-related injury and is experienced and comfortable getting an athletic person, even if you're not highly competitive as a mountain biker, getting you back to a sport that puts a lot of demand on your shoulders and your upper body. It's very frustrating being held back, kept off the bike longer than necessary because you're not taking the right steps to getting back on the bike, or you're also risking potential re-injury if you get back on the bike too soon when you haven't done the proper recovery and you don't have the proper strength and stability in your shoulder. The recovery process can can vary range how long it will take to get back on the bike, anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks for more mild injuries to up to 8 weeks, 2 months or longer for more severe forms of the injury. And if you end up going down the surgical route, follow directions of your surgeon, and when is it ideal to stress the injured body part and the surgery to make sure your surgery and your injury heals correctly. When it comes to rehab, since this injury actually disrupts the only bone connection of your whole shoulder girdle, because only the collarbone is the direct connection from your shoulder to your torso, because the rest of the shoulder is just connected by muscles, it's very important to regain proper mechanics, proper stability and strength and power in the shoulder to be able to successfully get back on the bike and get back on the trail and perform at your best and not get re-injured down the road. You're going to need a variety of exercises, everything from range of motion, muscle activation, muscle strengthening, as well as coordination drills to make sure your shoulder can react quickly. It can sustain repeated impacts. It's like mountain biking, going off of rocks, roots, going off drops and jumps are really quite jarring impacts to the shoulder. So if you don't build up like all movement, strength, stability, you will start seeing it break down the road. I've actually worked with multiple mountain bikers I've had this injury in the shoulder, and down the road, after thinking they've recovered, I start having challenges because they're missing some basic mobility, basic biomechanics, as well as it develops strength imbalances and muscle tightnesses and flexibility imbalances just from the nature of the body compensating around the injury when you first get back on the bike. So do your due diligence, work with somebody that is experienced with this injury, experienced with high impact sports, and you're more likely to going to end up being more successful in returning to the bike. If you have any questions about this injury or interested in work with me, either send me a DM or post a question in the comments. I hope you found this video useful, and if you know a mountain biker who is struggling with this injury, please send it to them to help them get some perspective on the recovery.